The mansion was magnificent in the way mausoleums were, grand, polished, and utterly lifeless. Crystal chandeliers cast a sterile glow over marble floors that echoed with every step, as if the house itself were counting witnesses. Wealth lived here in abundance, yet warmth did not. Standing in that vast room, Lina felt poorer than she ever had, not because of money, but because nothing human seemed to survive in a place like this. She stood alone at the center of the room, hands folded calmly in front of her, facing her husband's family. They sat in a precise line, expressions measured, eyes sharp with judgment. This was not a family gathering. It was a tribunal. At the head sat the matriarch, unmoving, her gaze already decided long before Lina entered the room. The disownment unfolded with brutal efficiency. Lawyers spoke instead of relatives. Documents slid across a polished table instead of words of explanation. There was no shouting, no raised voices, only the cold language of legality. Signatures were demanded. Access was revoked. Lina's name was stripped from records as if it had never belonged there at all. Her marriage was reduced to a clause, then erased. She waited for one thing, for her husband to speak. He stood beside his family, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the table. He did not meet her gaze. When accusations were made, of ambition, of manipulation, of marrying above her place, he remained silent. That silence cut deeper than every insult combined. In that moment, Lina understood that betrayal did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrived quietly, dressed as fear. They said she did not belong. That she had reached too far. That she had mistaken access for entitlement. No one asked who she was or what she had endured to stand there. No one cared that she had given loyalty without condition. Belonging, she realized, was never something they intended to grant her. The humiliation was subtle but absolute. Her name was removed. Her identity as a wife was nullified. Even the servants avoided her eyes as a suitcase appeared by the door, already packed by unseen hands. The decision had been made long before she was allowed to hear it. When Lina finally turned to leave, the doors opened without ceremony. The night air felt heavier than the room she exited. As the doors closed behind her, something inside her shifted. It wasn't just her status that had been taken, it was her innocence, her belief that love could survive power. Yet beneath the devastation, something else remained. Stripped of everything, Lina felt an unfamiliar clarity settle in. Whatever she was now, she was unowned. And the question lingered, sharp and unresolved. What happens when someone with nothing left refuses to break? Lina's new life fit inside 4 quiet rooms and a view of another brick wall. The apartment was clean but impersonal, furnished with the bare minimum, an aging couch, a narrow bed, a table that doubled as a desk. Money was tight, counted carefully, stretched deliberately. There were no chauffeurs, no staff, no doors opening for her before she reached them. What unsettled her most, however, was the silence. No messages. No explanations. No one asking if she had landed safely after being pushed out of a world that once claimed her. Outside those walls, the story had already been written without her consent. The newspapers and whispers carried the same narrative. She had been a mistake, an opportunist, a woman who reached for luxury and paid the price. People believed it easily. The rich were always convincing when they spoke in unison. Lina learned quickly how invisible truth became once money decided what version survived. Her husband vanished as thoroughly as if he had never existed. No calls. No letters. Not even an apology disguised as concern. He chose comfort over courage, inheritance over integrity. That absence hurt more than the loss of wealth. It confirmed what she had feared but never allowed herself to name, that his love had limits and she had crossed them by needing him to stand up. Lina mourned quietly, but not for the life she lost. She mourned the trust she had given without hesitation. The belief that loyalty would be returned. That partnership meant protection. She grieved the version of herself who had thought endurance could substitute for respect. In moments of stillness, memories surfaced uninvited. Her childhood came back in fragments, her mother working long hours, teaching her that dignity was not purchased but practiced. She remembered learning to be strong without entitlement, proud without permission. Hardship had shaped her, but it had never diminished her. Somewhere along the way, she had forgotten that. She reflected on the dinners where she smiled through insults, the rooms where she softened herself to avoid conflict. How often she had swallowed disrespect in the name of peace. How often she had mistaken silence for grace. What surprised even Lina was the absence of rage. Instead, a calm settled over her, measured, deliberate, unsettling in its quiet. She did not rush to explain herself or defend her name. She watched. She waited. And beneath that stillness, something sharpened. This was not surrender. It was the pause before momentum. The message arrived without urgency, which somehow made it heavier. A short email, carefully worded, requesting a meeting. The sender introduced himself as a legal historian, retired, and in possession of information that concerned her directly. Lina almost ignored it. Her life had become a collection of strange silences and unanswered questions, and she had learned caution. But something in the tone, measured, almost apologetic, made her respond. They met in a modest office lined with aging books and yellowed files. The man was older than she expected, his hands unsteady, his eyes carrying the weight of long-held regret. He did not waste time with pleasantries. Instead, he opened a folder thick with documents and placed it between them, as if relieved to finally set it down. What followed unraveled decades of deliberate erasure. The papers revealed a lineage carefully cut out of history, names scratched from records, signatures altered, wills sealed and forgotten. Lina's grandmother, it turned out, had been born into a family whose assets formed the quiet backbone of a vast fortune. When she refused to comply with a marriage meant to consolidate power, she was removed. Not publicly, but administratively. Her existence became inconvenient, and inconvenience was something wealth knew how to eliminate. Lina listened, stunned, as the man explained how trusts had been restructured, how control was transferred under false pretenses, how silence had been bought and maintained. Her bloodline had not disappeared by accident. It had been deliberately erased to secure permanent authority for others. The truth settled slowly, painfully. The wealth sustaining her husband's family, the empire they guarded so fiercely, did not legally belong to them. It rested on a foundation built from stolen inheritance and buried names. And she, unknowingly, was the last living link to what had been taken. The revelation should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt heavy. Lina did not imagine luxury or power. She thought of her grandmother, reduced to a footnote that never existed. Of a history denied, a life rewritten by people who believed money entitled them to decide whose story mattered. She mourned the stolen past more than the fortune itself. Money could be replaced. Legacy could not. As the man spoke of legal pathways and dormant clauses, Lina understood something unsettling. This was not just about inheritance. It was about unfinished justice. About a truth that had waited patiently for someone willing to face it. The irony pressed in on her chest. The very family that had deemed her unworthy, that had cast her out without hesitation, survived because of her bloodline. Their power depended on the woman they had erased. In that moment, the story shifted. Lina was no longer simply enduring the aftermath of loss. She was standing at the threshold of power she had never sought, but could no longer ignore. The collapse did not arrive with explosions or headlines. It came quietly, through numbers that stopped aligning and signatures that suddenly required additional approval. Accounts were frozen without warning. Votes stalled. Decisions that once passed unquestioned were delayed by invisible barriers. For the first time in generations, the family's authority encountered resistance it could not intimidate or purchase away. Certainty gave way to fear. Inside boardrooms and private halls, tension replaced confidence. Accusations surfaced, subtle at first, then sharp. Siblings questioned one another's judgment. Advisors contradicted past assurances. The unity the family had always displayed proved to be a performance, brittle under pressure. They had never trusted one another. They had only trusted control. And now, control was slipping. Through it all, Lina remained absent. Her silence unsettled them more than confrontation ever could have. There were no demands, no public claims, no emotional appeals. Just pressure, precise, patient, and unrelenting. Legal inquiries surfaced from dormant corners. Documents were revisited. Clauses once dismissed as irrelevant were suddenly enforceable. Every step forward felt blocked by something no one could name. Then, without warning, she returned. Not as a wife. Not as an outsider begging for reconsideration. She entered the same world that had rejected her through formal channels, escorted not by sentiment but by law. The room was familiar, the polished table, the guarded expressions, but the balance had shifted. Lina stood composed, her presence calm, her posture unyielding. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Facts spoke for her. Evidence was presented methodically. Lineage confirmed. Trust structures exposed. Authority traced back to its original source. There was no room for interpretation, no space for denial. Each document tightened the silence in the room, replacing disbelief with dawning comprehension. Her former husband watched from across the table, recognition breaking across his face too late to matter. He finally understood what he had lost, and it had nothing to do with wealth. He had traded integrity for safety, and safety had not saved him. The realization hollowed him out, leaving regret where certainty once lived. At the head of the table, the matriarch struggled to maintain composure. The woman who had ruled through fear and calculation now negotiated from desperation. Her voice, once commanding, softened into something close to pleading. Stability, she argued. Legacy. The family name. Anything to preserve what remained. Lina listened without interruption. When she spoke, it was not to punish, but to clarify. She did not demand collapse. She demanded acknowledgement. Truth restored to record. Authority returned to its rightful place. History corrected, not rewritten to suit convenience. This was not revenge. Revenge required anger. What Lina carried was resolve. Her dominance lay in restraint. In refusing spectacle. In allowing reality to speak louder than emotion. The reckoning was devastating not because it was loud, but because it was unavoidable. By the time the meeting ended, the family understood something irreversible had occurred. Power had not been seized from them. It had simply gone home. The final confrontations happened behind closed doors, away from lawyers and observers. They were quieter than Lina expected, stripped of ceremony and power. Her former husband spoke first, his apology careful, fragmented, weighed down by everything he had failed to do. He spoke of fear, of pressure, of choosing survival. Lina listened without interruption. When he finished, she acknowledged his words, not with acceptance, not with anger, but with finality. Some wounds did not require reopening to prove they still existed. Closure did not mean reconciliation. Others followed with apologies of their own, each arriving too late to matter. They were shaped more by loss than remorse, more by consequence than understanding. Lina recognized the difference immediately. She did not reject their words, but she did not absorb them either. Forgiveness, she understood now, was not an obligation. It was a decision. She forgave selectively, not to ease their conscience, but to release herself from the weight of carrying what was never hers to bear. With the truth restored, Lina turned her attention forward. She restructured the inheritance deliberately, dismantling the mechanisms that had allowed power to concentrate unchecked for so long. Safeguards replaced secrecy. Oversight replaced assumption. The wealth would remain, but it would no longer serve entitlement or erasure. Legacy, she ensured, would no longer be built on silence. The family name survived, preserved in records and institutions, but its dominance ended quietly. No single voice ruled. No one person controlled what had once been hoarded so fiercely. Stability was achieved, not through fear, but through balance. In the end, Lina made no attempt to reclaim a place within the family that had rejected her. Belonging, she realized, meant nothing if it required disappearance. She chose independence instead. Not isolation, but self-possession. She kept her name. She kept her story. The final moments were simple. Lina left the estate without witnesses, without announcements. The doors closed behind her once more, but this time they held no power. She carried clarity instead of grief, peace instead of longing, control without cruelty. There was no victory speech, no public reckoning. The triumph was quieter than that, measured in dignity reclaimed and truth restored. And as Lina stepped fully into a life defined by her own terms, one truth remained undeniable, settling into place at last. They disowned her, never realizing she was the foundation they stood on.